In the heart of one of history's greatest empires, there was beauty, wealth, and power, but also cruelty beyond imagination. Ancient Persia, with its sprawling palaces, gold-laden markets, and unstoppable armies, was admired for its sophistication. Yet behind the grandeur, a darker side thrived. Justice in Persia was not always swift, nor was it merciful. For those who defied the king or betrayed the empire, punishments were designed not just to end life, but to make it an example, a living warning to all. The Persian rulers believed that order in their empire depended on absolute loyalty. Treason, rebellion, and even certain crimes of dishonor were met with punishment so severe that they became legends whispered for centuries. Many of these methods were designed to break a person both physically and mentally, ensuring that no one would dare challenge the king's authority again. One of the most infamous punishments was Scaphism, often called the boats. It was a slow and horrifying method reserved for the most hated traitors. The condemned person was placed between two hollowed-out wooden boats, one half covering the top of the body and the other beneath, leaving only the head, hands, and feet exposed. They were force-fed milk and honey until they could consume no more. Then their exposed skin was smeared with more honey. Left to float in a stagnant pond under the blazing sun, the victim was swarmed by insects, flies, mosquitoes, and ants, drawn to the sweetness. Over days, the insects would bite, sting, and burrow into the flesh, while the victim remained alive, unable to move. Then there was the method of impalement, a punishment feared throughout the empire. The condemned would be hoisted above a sharpened stake and slowly lowered onto it, the weight of their own body forcing the stake upward. This brutal form of execution was sometimes carried out in public squares, a gruesome display meant to terrify any who thought of defying the law. Historical accounts suggest that in some cases the victim was kept alive for hours, even days, while the stake did its deadly work. Flaying alive was another extreme measure, usually reserved for corrupt officials who betrayed the king's trust. Stripped of their clothes, the condemned would have their skin carefully removed while still breathing. In some recorded punishments, the skin was then nailed to the official chair or hung at the entrance of their workplace as a warning to their successor. The message was clear: corruption against the king would be met with unthinkable pain. For warriors who deserted in battle, the Persians had the punishment of blinding. Heated metal rods or sharp knives were used to remove a soldier's eyes, rendering him useless for combat. In some cases, the blinded man would be left alive to wander as a living example of dishonor. But Persia's punishments were not limited to the physical body. They also attacked the spirit. Public humiliation was a weapon in itself. Criminals could be paraded through the streets in chains, their crimes announced to all, their families shamed for generations. In a society built on honor, this social death was as feared as any blade or stake. One of the most chilling aspects of Persian justice was its theatrical nature. Executions were often staged as grand events, with large crowds watching. The aim was to turn punishment into a lesson, embedding fear deep into the minds of the people. For the rulers, this was not just about removing a criminal. It was about reinforcing the unshakable power of the throne. Yet, there were punishments so cruel that they were rarely spoken of openly. Some accounts tell of criminals being sealed in clay jars and left under the scorching desert sun until the heat and lack of air took their lives. Others describe prisoners buried up to their necks, left to die of thirst as the desert winds blew sand over their faces. Ancient Persia, for all its advancements in architecture, art, and governance, was also a land where justice could be ruthless. For the wrong person in the wrong time, the empire's beauty could turn into a nightmare, and these punishments, whether carried out in the marketplace under the eyes of thousands or in the silence of a hidden courtyard, were a reminder that the king's will was absolute. But what happened when these punishments were used not against foreign enemies, but against Persia's own nobles, generals, and trusted advisors? That's where the cruelty reached its most shocking heights. When it came to punishing Persia's highest-ranking traitors, generals, nobles, and royal advisors, the cruelty was often taken to an entirely different level. The empire's rulers understood that the fall of a powerful man sent ripples across the land, and so their punishments were designed to crush not only the body, but the reputation, the family name, and the legacy of the condemned. One of the most notorious cases was that of Bessus, a Persian satrap who betrayed King Darius III during the time of Alexander the Great's invasion. After attempting to claim the throne for himself, Bessus was captured. His punishment was as symbolic as it was brutal. First, his ears and nose were cut off, a mark of utter disgrace in Persian culture. Then, he was tied to two bent trees. The trees were slowly released, tearing his body apart in an instant. The method was rare but deeply feared, for it sent a message that treachery would be met with destruction, both swift and unforgettable. For nobles who plotted against the throne, the Persians sometimes used stoning, not the chaotic act seen in other cultures, but an organized ceremonial execution. The condemned was placed in a pit, often stripped of titles and ornaments, and high-ranking officials would cast the first stones, followed by the public. It was a way of turning the entire community into participants in the execution, ensuring that no one could claim ignorance of the king's judgment. Perhaps the most infamous punishment for betrayal was entombment alive. In certain cases, traitors were placed inside underground chambers or massive stone blocks with only a small hole for air. Guards would station themselves nearby, ensuring no rescue could take place. This method was slow, often taking days, and it was meant to give the condemned plenty of time to contemplate their choices. Death by molten metal was another rare but shocking method reserved for the gravest crimes against the crown. Ancient accounts suggest that traitors could be executed by pouring molten gold or lead into their mouths, a symbolic act if their crime involved greed or the misuse of royal funds. While the accuracy of such accounts is debated by historians, the fact that they survived in Persian lore speaks volumes about the reputation of the empire's justice. The Persians also had a punishment specifically designed for false prophets or religious deceivers, the Tower of Silence Isolation. Unlike the sacred Zoroastrian practice for the dead, this version twisted the tradition for the living. The condemned would be placed atop a barren tower far from the city, left exposed to the elements, scavenging birds, and the slow agony of hunger and thirst. No burial, no rites, only abandonment until death claimed them. But the most feared punishment among the royal court was family eradication. In cases where the king believed the betrayal was too dangerous to forgive, the condemned's family could be stripped of titles, wealth, and even their right to live within the empire's borders. In extreme situations, entire family lines were executed to ensure no heir could rise to seek revenge. It was a ruthless form of political cleansing that kept many potential conspirators in check. For generals who lost wars due to cowardice or deliberate sabotage, there was the public whipping to death. This was no quick lash of anger. It was a carefully measured execution, carried out by trained soldiers in the main square. The number of lashes was set deliberately high, ensuring the victim would not survive. As the blows fell, the accused was forced to confess his crimes aloud for all to hear, his voice growing weaker until it disappeared completely. Among the most theatrical punishments was the royal hunt execution. In this grim spectacle, the condemned would be released into the royal hunting grounds, unarmed, while the king and his guards pursued them on horseback with spears and arrows. Though this method was reserved for enemies of exceptional status, it was as much a sport for the royals as it was a statement of dominance. In the desert provinces, another punishment emerged: burial in salt pits, Criminals were tied and placed in natural salt flats or pits, where the sun, the salt, and the dryness would dehydrate them painfully while their wounds burned with salt crystals. Such executions were slow, sometimes lasting multiple days, and were reserved for crimes that deeply offended the Persian gods or the royal family. The cruelty of these punishments was not random. It was deliberate, calculated, and often symbolic. Ancient Persia understood the power of fear as a tool of governance. A punishment was not merely about ending a life, it was about sending a message to the living, and the harsher the crime, the more unforgettable the punishment had to be. Yet, for all this brutality, Persian justice was not entirely without structure. Trials, often conducted in royal courts, preceded many of these punishments. The accused could present their case, though in reality the king's word was final. If the ruler's mind was set, no amount of pleading or evidence could save the condemned. As centuries passed, many of these punishments became stories told in hushed voices. Some were exaggerated, others perhaps softened for younger ears. But in the heart of the empire, everyone understood the core truth. The Persian throne was sacred, and to defy it was to sign one's own death warrant. The ruins of Persepolis and other Persian cities still stand today, their grand columns and carvings a reminder of the empire's glory. But beneath the beauty lies the shadow of its cruelty. For every magnificent hall and golden crown, there were those who paid the ultimate price for crossing the king. Their names erased, their bodies destroyed, their deaths serving as warnings for generations. And so the legacy of Persia is a dual one. It is a story of art, science, and culture that shaped the ancient world, but also of punishments so horrific that they remain etched in human memory thousands of years later.